and I'm just going to talk a bit about first how these sessions are going to go. So hopefully you'll have all downloaded the resources by now, and you'll end up with a folder that looks something like this. So it's got three session folders in there, and in there there's the README. This just contains like lab instructions for the exercises, and then there's a PDF which are the lecture slides. So you'll notice that the lecture slides, especially this first one, is like 80 slides or something. You know, I'm not going to sit here and show you 80 slides worth of content, because then we'll be talking about this for the entire day and not actually get on to do any practice. So these lecture slides are more a reference for you to take home. So, you know, read through them. If you're doing the lab exercises, you're not quite sure what's going on, flick through. Most of the information that you'll need to do the labs today are in these slides somewhere, and if it's not, then there are like web links and stuff around that will give you the resources you need. So how I'm going to be doing the demos today mainly is through a website called codepen.io. So this is a great website. It lets me, you know, type HTML and CSS live, and you know, we can see the results of what I type updating in real time. The links to these code pens that I'm going to be doing in class, they're on the, they will be, or they are.
We'll put the links up once after the first session. The links should be on our website. There's a in-class demo page on the website.
Yep.
It's not on there yet, but it's on there.
Yeah, so you'll get everything I type today, you'll get as a resource as well that you can use, you know, to help you through. Something else that I would encourage you all to do today, so definitely ask the tutors, you know, put your hand out whenever you need any assistance, but also don't be afraid today to meet new people, you know, actually like work together. You know, that's part of what all software development is about, including web development. It's really like a team experience, and so, you know, get to know your fellow new club members here and make everyone feel welcome, and that'll be fantastic. All right, so without further ado, let's get into writing some HTML. So just a show of hands first, who's done any HTML and CSS before? Who's done any? A couple of people. So that's good, because this is going to be targeted at you know, the ultra basic level. Like, you definitely don't need any experience coming into this, and so that's where I'm glad to see that that's where most of us are at. All right, so who's looked at a website online and wondered how it's made, you know, and maybe have gone and looked at like the source code for a website before? So who's kind of seen HTML before, even if you haven't written it? So, okay, so a few more people, that's cool. Yep. So what you see on the page right here, this is HTML, and this is what makes up the content of a website, and also like the structure of a document, so how everything is laid out there. Then we've got CSS, which we'll be looking at next, and CSS is how everything is styled, the visuals, the look and feel, how to make those websites actually look pretty. And then the two combine, HTML and CSS, you can make some really amazing looking websites. All right. The third technology that goes along with this is JavaScript, which we won't be covering today, but there will definitely be workshops on JavaScript in the future in this club. Okay, so the first thing is, let's look at the structure of an HTML page, okay? So what these things are, right, the things with the little arrow brackets, these are called tags, okay, or elements. And an HTML page is made up of a bunch of these tags, and you can have tags inside other tags. And we see this one up the top here, HTML. That's like the start of an HTML page. And then down the bottom, you can see /HTML. So that's like the slash HTML is ending this tag. So this is the opening of the HTML document, and the slash HTML at the end, that's the closing. Okay. Now, within that HTML tag, we have two other tags. We've got this head tag here, and we've got the body tag here. So the head tag lets you specify a little bit of metadata and information about your website. We won't really be focusing on that too much today. One thing, the title that you can put in the header, that's what lets you change, the thing that appears in your browser tab up here. Then the body is what we're going to be focusing on. So the body is where you put all your actual content that you want to see. All right, and we've already got a little bit of content in this page right here. So within this body, we've got two elements. We have this one, this is H1, that's a heading, and so you can see that there in gigantic text. And then we've got P here. P is a paragraph, okay, and a paragraph is, a paragraph of text. Okay, so that's the most basic kind of web page that you can get. This one here, this is a comment. Where are we here? This one, that's a comment. A comment is something you can write in your source code to help you figure out what's going on, but it's not going to appear to the user. Now, if I edit this, and then as I'm editing through CodePen, it's going to update, and you can see these changes. Okay, so as well as headings and paragraphs, there are a lot more HTML elements, and you build up your page by combining a bunch of these. So with headings, there's a few different levels. H1 is the largest one that you can see here, and they go all the way down to H6. So each level of heading is slightly smaller, as you can see here. So the H2 is smaller than the H1 there. All right. Now, a lot of elements like headings and paragraphs that you can see here are what's called block level elements. So every time I have a new block level element, it's going to start on a new line in the output, okay? So right now you can see everything here on a new line, but if I were to take this paragraph and stick it up here on the same line in my source code, but you can see in the output that didn't change at all. So every time you have a new block level element, it's going to start on a new line. Okay. Then there are other kinds of elements that don't do that, and they're called inline elements, and they only take up the minimum amount of width that they need in order to display themselves properly. So a good example of that is, let's say I wanted to emphasize this word first here. So I could, if I wanted to, surround this with a tag called strong. And so strong is a tag that's designed to provide some kind of importance to the text that you're surrounding there. It did not start a new line, so the word first did not jump down there. Another example of that is EM. So EM is another one that's designed to provide some kind of emphasis to text. All right. By default, EM will style the text in italics, and strong will style the text in bold. You can change that using CSS. We can see that later, but these are the defaults. All right. Okay, so we've looked at some basic headings, and we've looked at some paragraphs. So obviously, HTML documents contain a lot more than just headings and paragraphs. We might want to put a list of text in here, okay? So if I want to display a list of stuff, there are a couple of different kinds of lists in HTML. So one of them is an unordered list, and the tag for this is UL. Okay. And inside the UL, I can put any number of list items. List item is its own tag as well. And so if I stick one of those in there and put some text in there, then we can see on my page, we've got that bullet point with first list item, all right? And then I can have, as many of these as I want. All right, and they're all going to be bullet points here. All right. So other than an unordered list, I can also have an ordered list. If I change this to OL, that's going to make it an ordered list, and we can see now it's numbered 1, 2. Okay. With an ordered list, if we want to, we can change from numbers 1, 2, that's the default. We can change it to something else. We can change it to like ABC, for example, if we want to. What you do is you give it a type. So what I'm typing right now, this is called an attribute, okay? Hopefully that ticks. Yep, there we go. So an attribute, this little bit of text here that says something equals something else, in this case type equals A. An attribute is something that lets you modify the default behavior of an HTML element, all right? And there are a whole bunch of different attributes for different kinds of elements. Some of those attributes are required, which we'll look at a couple of those in a sec. Others are optional. This one's optional. I don't have to put type equals A. That the default is type equals 1, which means the list 1, 2, 3. With an ordered list, another one, I believe I can just write reversed. And now the order is reversed. So instead of AB, now it's BA. So these are examples of attributes that we can apply to an ordered list. All right. Now let's look at some more elements that might be useful for you to put on a page. Okay. So one of the really key elements that you need on a page is a hyperlink. Yeah. So hyperlinks are how users actually browse, navigate through not only your own website, but also go from your website to somewhere else. Yeah. So it's one of the most important things. Now the tag for a hyperlink is A. Okay. The reason it's A is because another name for hyperlink is anchor. That's why it's called A. So what we can do is we can surround any of this text here with an A tag, and we can then get that text to link to somewhere else. All right, so for example, this word another here, if I give this an A tag, all right, so we'll see it's not done anything yet, okay, because an A tag has a required attribute. So if you're defining a hyperlink, you really need to tell it where it's going to go. So if I went, for example, let me just type that right. Okay, so if I stick this href into my hyperlink, then now we can see that that's changed into the hyperlink that you're all familiar with. Yeah, and I could, I'll just double click that. I'll open it in a new tab to avoid me losing this. And we can see there that Google just opened up. Okay. All right. So that's what a hyperlink is. You can put any, these are called URLs, and they describe, they describe what resource you're going to be navigating to when you click the link. All right, so let's say we don't want to link to Google, but let's say we want to link to somewhere else in the same page. So maybe I have, for example, up here, or let's say right down the bottom of my page, I have a paragraph with a link in it, and it's going to say scroll to top. Okay, and what we want to do is that if I'm down here and I click this, it's going to scroll my page all the way up to the top. So this is called internal page navigation or hash navigation, and the reason why it's called that is because what I can do is I can give any element on my page an ID. So I do that, say, I'll give my heading, my first heading here, an ID, so I'll call it ID equals, and then in these speech marks, I can put anything I want. I'll put my heading, there we go. Okay, and then in the anchor here, I can go href equals, and I can go hash, and then that name that I gave it, so my heading down there. So once that's all set up, then if I scroll down to the bottom here, click scroll to top, it pops back up to the top. So what it does is it will scroll the page to, it'll make the element with that particular ID visible in the page. So because my heading 1 there had my heading ID, then when I click this link, that heading is going to scroll all the way so it's in view. All right. By the way, I'll just take this time to point out, if you have any questions about what I'm saying, you're most welcome to just stick your hand up at any time, and I will be more than happy to take questions. Yeah? Sorry, say that one more time. How to delete the underline. Okay, so we can do that via styling, all right, using CSS, and I will show you how to do this when we work on the CSS letter. So I'll make a note of myself to show you that exact thing. Delete underline. Yep. Okay, so I'll definitely show you how to do that. All right. So now let's look at something a little bit more exciting than text. Let's actually add an image to this page, shall we? Okay, so I'll stick an image up the top here, just below my initial heading. So image, the tag to add an image is img. It's not image. Okay, and then image has a required attribute. It's called src, source, and you give this image tag a URL that points to the image you're trying to load. Okay, so the source attribute of image works kind of like the href element of the A tag, in that you're specifying a URL and it'll go, this time it goes fetch the image there. So what image am I going to put here? Well, one common thing that you'll do when you're developing websites and you want to build up the layout of your page, you want to make sure everything looks good, but you don't actually have the content yet that you want to display. So what you might do is you might stick some dummy images and dummy text in. So you've probably all heard of lorem ipsum text and seen examples of that. So there are a bunch of those around. These days I like to use cat ipsum. So whenever I need dummy text, I'll come over to catipsum.com and get it to generate some text, and then I'll sort of copy that and paste it into my website. Like I can dump some of that down here if I want to, just to get a whole bunch of text appearing down here. All right, this is great for organizing your website layouts without having the content. So you can do the same with images. Again, sticking with the cat theme here, I like to use placekitten.com. And again, there are millions of these. I bet you can find an image, like a fake image website for pretty much any category of things that you want. You know, maybe if you're actually building a sports website, you might want to use pictures of like random pictures of sports equipment and stuff instead. But what I can do here is I can copy this URL on this website and go and stick it into my image source. That didn't quite work out. Okay, I'll just type it. Okay, and there we have a kitten on our webpage. All right, so place kitten is great. Okay, it lets you put you know, kittens on your page, which is always great. It's also really good because you can request images of any size. So this first bit of the URL here is how wide the image should be. And the second bit here is how high the image should be in pixels. So I could make it, for example, I could change it to like 400 by 200, and then it would, you know, now the image is twice as wide there. All right. So that's how we can add images to our website is using this tag here. Now you'll notice all the other tags I've shown so far, so all these text tags, list items, paragraphs, everything, they all have an opening tag here, like this H2, and then they all have a closing tag, this one here. Okay, so you'll notice that image is different. So image just has it just has the opening tag. There's no closing tag for an image. All right. So we can make our images interactive as well. Like maybe I want to browse to a different place when I click this kitten. So I can put a hyperlink around an image just as I can do it for text. And it works absolutely fine. I'll do another one of those hashtag ones. I'll give this thing the end ID. And then if I click this cat, it should scroll me down to the bottom of the page, which it did. Great. So you can make images into hyperlinks just as you can make text into hyperlinks. Right. Now, one thing with images are, by default, images are inline elements, okay? So right now I've kind of got the image sitting out here by itself, okay? But I could, if I wanted to, I could surround that also with a paragraph, and I could put some text before the image and some more text after the image, and you can see that we can see that now the image is in the middle of the text like that. All right. Okay. Now, before we move on to some styling, there's one more HTML element that I'd like to just show you in class. So this one is called a table. So it's pretty common that you want to display tables of data in a website, and the table structure lets you do that. So I'm not going to type out a full table because it can actually be quite time consuming. So what I'm going to do is flick over to one I've prepared earlier and dump that in here and then explain a little bit about what's going on. Okay, so we can see the table there, and now let's look at the actual code that went into making that. Okay, so this is the opening for table. It's table, and then down the bottom there's a slash table. Then we've got 3 sections of the table. So you don't have to have all 3 of these sections if you don't want to. It depends exactly what you're trying to do with your table. The first one here is a T head, so that's the header. Okay, in there I've got 2 rows in my header. It's the one that says shopping cart and then the 2 columns that say item and amount. So this header has 2 rows in it. When you're developing a table, you specify the rows with TR. So we can see the TR there and then the /TR there. So we can see that we have 2 rows. Okay, now within our rows, we want table cells, right? And there are 2 different kinds of cells that we can have. The ones that I've got in my header are these TH cells, and they're supposed to be header cells. You know, they're supposed to represent some information that stands out to you when you're building your table, okay? And you can see on the page there that they're styled differently, so the header cells are styled in bold by default. All right, so my first row here has just the 1 cell in it, okay? Because every other row in my table has 2 cells in it, and I wanted that shopping cart text to spread across the whole table, I gave it colspan equals 2, which means that particular cell should take up 2 columns. If I left that out, then we'd see when this updates, we see now the shopping cart is in the first column and like not in the second column there. So just going back here, put that back in. So our second row has the item and amount there. Then we've got our table body. So this section is supposed to contain the main data in our table, and I've just got 4 rows there. Each of these rows has 2 cells, and this is the other kind of table cell. It's TD. Okay. One of our tutors, do we know why it's called TD? Anyone? Does anyone know why that's the name of this element? I never remember. So if someone knows, then please enlighten the rest of us. But there you go. That's how you make table cells. And then the last one here is our footer. Okay. And that again, it just has a single row there. So the reason why we like to break our table up into the header, the main body, and the footer is because it will allow us to more easily style each section differently if we need to. The other cool thing, I don't know how useful this is, but it is cool. I could say if I took that footer from there and stuck it up here in the middle between the header and the body, we can see that the actual table in the end didn't change at all. So within the table, it will always stick the header first, then the body, then the footer. All right. Let me just put that back to where it is. Okay. Now the last element, I guess, the last 2 HTML elements that I'll show you now are divs and spans. So a span is an inline element. I'll put one next to this word destroy. Okay, and a div is a block level element. So I'll stick one of those there. And if I scroll down to the bottom there where those are, so this div here, it doesn't look like anything special. It just looks like another paragraph of text. And the span, we can see that it didn't change the look of that destroy word at all. Okay, so divs and spans are elements that don't really do anything by themselves, but what they are really useful for is when we try to style our page, they let us mark certain sections of the document that we want to style in different ways. Okay. Great. So what we're going to do now is look at some basic styling, okay? We're going to see what we can do to get this monstrosity of a web page that I have here looking reasonable. All right, so before we do that, were there any questions that people had about HTML elements by themselves at this point? Fantastic. Okay, so I'm going to pull up this CSS tab in CodePen, so this is where I can write my CSS. Before I do that though, let me just flick through so yeah, we can see pretty much everything I talked about is in here somewhere. I want to point out that if you want to include CSS in the web pages that you're developing, the way you will do that is you'll create a CSS file, so a file with the CSS extension, and then you will add one of these link elements into your page header, okay? So if I've got a CSS file called mystyle.css that's in the same folder as my HTML file, then I would say I would use this link here. I'd stick it in my page header. I won't do that with CodePen because CodePen has this CSS window built in. Any CSS that I write here will just be applied to the page. All right. So let me start writing some CSS. Okay. So what I've just done is I've written a CSS selector, okay? So I'll talk a little bit more about these at the end here, but basically what it does is it lets me say what elements on the page am I trying to style here, okay? So H1 means I'm going to style all H1 elements on the page, and how I'm going to style them is, you know, whatever I write here. For example, if I write color red, then we can see that my header there has now changed to red text, all right? So that there also is an example of changing the color of something. So there are a couple of different ways we can change the color of elements. Changing the color property here, that changes the text color, all right? We can also change the background color. For example, if I change the background color of that heading to light gray, then we will get this effect right here. In terms of specifying colors, so here I've just written out words for colors, and there are many of them. If I, whoops, let me just pull up an example of this. Okay, so that's not the best website. Here we go. This is the one I normally show. So there are all these colors that are predefined. So you can have a look at this website. It's W3 Schools CSS colors. So all these colors have a word like seashell. We can see they're not just the standard colors. There are lots of fancy colors in here. All right. And we can specify using those words what color we're trying to use. You'll notice here on this page, let me just make it slightly bigger and easier to see. We can see that each one of these also has a code here, the one that starts with the hash. So what this code is, it's describing the actual numerical value of that color. All right, and so let me just, and we can specify those. If one of these colors isn't good enough for us, we can customize. So if I go back to here and change, let me just get rid of that one for a sec. Okay, So how these values work is they range from completely black, which is all zeros here, up to completely white, which is all Fs. And the first two characters let you specify the red value. The second two let you specify the green value, and the third let you specify the blue value, and then they can combine in any ways. So if I went, that's going to be completely red, for example. All right, so how the numbers work, as you can see, these are called hex numbers, so the counting system doesn't go from 0 to 9, it goes from 0 all the way up to F. So the letter A is actually like the value 10, and then B is 11 up to F, which is 15. And then 10 in hex is equal to the number 16 in normal decimal counting. So does anyone know what FF would be in hex? Do people know this? What this value is? So this value here is 255. So FF corresponds to the decimal number 255, which is the largest color value for a particular color. So if I add some blue to this, we can see that we get red and blue combined to give us this magenta color. If I delete this, we go to blue. If I add some green to that, we now have that cyan color. Okay. And so on and so forth. You can put any value in there. There are millions and millions of possible combinations, so you can get very specific. If you don't like dealing with hex, you can use this method of specifying colors. Okay, and this one you specify the red, green, and blue as normal decimal numbers instead. If you want to include some transparency, maybe you've got some elements appearing over others, you want some to appear slightly transparent, you can change it to RGBA, and then add a fourth value on here that ranges from 0, which is completely transparent, to 1, which is completely opaque, and then anywhere in between. Okay. So pretty much anything can have a color and a background color. All right. Now let's have a look at a border next. Okay. So sometimes we want to give our elements borders. All right. And borders have 3 different things that you need to configure. You need to configure how thick the border is, you need to configure what style the border is, and you need to configure what the color of the border is. All right, so let's say I want a really thick border around this heading. I'm going to give it a 10 pixel border. Okay. Then I'm going to say, okay, what kind of border is this? I'm going to make it solid. Okay, and then what color? I'll make it, I'm going to guess at what a color exists here. I'm going to make it aquamarine, because that seems like a color. Okay, that looks a little bit horrifying. I'm just going to change it to something else. There we go. So there's a nice thick crimson border around the entire heading. All right. Maybe I don't want it to be solid. Maybe I want it to be dotted. So we could change that. Or dashed will be this one. Okay. Maybe I want to specify different borders for different sides of this. So instead of just border, I could go, for example, border dash bottom. And let's override the bottom border. We'll make the bottom one even thicker. We'll make it 20 pixels. This one can be dashed, and it will be blue. So I can specify border to draw a border around the whole thing, or border top, bottom, left, and right to specify borders around each individual side. Okay, as well as borders, there are two other properties. There's margins and padding, which essentially let us specify spacings within and spacings between different elements. Okay, so with margins let us specify the spacings between different elements. Okay. Now, if I want to specify the margins, say, on the bottom of the heading here, I'm going to use margin dash bottom. And I specify how big that margin should be. So if I give it a 30 pixel margin on the bottom, it just slightly increased the size between that heading and the next one. So the margin below a H1 is quite big already. That's why changing it to 30 pixels didn't do too much there. If I change it to 0, we can see now that table down there has kind of butted up almost right next to the heading. All right. As well as margin bottom, we could specify, for example, margin right. Give that a 50 pixel right-hand margin, and now we can see that white space has appeared just there. If we want to specify all the margins at once, if we can write just margin, this will give a 100 pixel margin all the way around the shape. Okay, so we can see that here, all that white space that just got created. Or we can specify this one. We can go, if we specify two values, the first one will get applied to the top and bottom, and the second one will get applied to the left and right. Okay. A cool trick, by the way, is if you specify, I'll show you this actually. Let me just quickly show you another property. If I give this thing a width of 50%, it's going to take up exactly half the amount of space that it's normally allowed to take up. And then if I want to center that, I can, if I give it auto margins on the left and right, it will center the thing horizontally. Okay. I'll just comment that out. The last one is if I want to specify 4 values for the margin, then it's going to apply the first one to the top, the second one to the right, the third one to the bottom, and the fourth one to the left of the thing. So I'm going to write a comment here. All right. Okay. So we can see that margins are white space between one element and another. If we want to specify padding, that's slightly different. So we'll see what that looks like now. So you specify padding in exactly the same way as you specify a margin. So all these different syntaxes all work. I'm just going to give this thing 50 pixels of padding around all sides and see what happens. So we can see that padding is spacing within the element, and the padding of an element, the padding appears between the content, which is this text here, and the border, okay? And padding takes on the background color of the element as well. So we can see all this red in here. All right. So we've looked at borders, margins, padding, color. Are there any questions about those properties before we move on to some more CSS stuff? All right. Cool. All right. I am just going to comment out all this stuff. So it's there for you to see, but it won't actually apply any styles to the page. So more things that we might like to do. I'm going to apply some styles to some paragraphs now. Let's look at fonts, okay? So fonts are something useful. We might want to change away from this default, what's essentially Times New Roman font, okay? And how we can do that is specify the font family of something, all right? So there are 5 different font families that are guaranteed to be supported by any browser, and they are serif. So if I write that in, we can see that nothing's changing here because serif's the default. You know what? I'm actually going to apply this style to the whole body because if you apply a font family to the whole body, it's going to affect all the headings, all the text in here. All right. Then there's sans serif, okay, which looks like this. So the serifs are those little flicks on the end of the font. So we can see sans serif looks much more like mechanical and like it's been printed or something, but it's cleaner. And then there's monospace, which is every single character in monospace font takes up the same width. So this little exclamation mark, even though it's quite narrow, takes up the same amount of width as this I, even though the I has those bars there, and including the spaces. So monospace font is great for text that you need everything to line up properly. Like it's most commonly used in code and like mathematical environments and things like that, where you need all the text to line up really nicely. Then there's I don't know why this is default, but there you go. If you want some Comic Sans font on your web page, cursive is a default font that's supported by all web browsers, and so is this one. Okay, so there are a couple more interesting font choices, cursive and fantasy, that are supported by anything. Now, of course, we don't want to restrict ourselves to those 5. We might want to use something a bit nicer. Okay. So any font, I can write any font name I want in this font family, and it will work if the browser that's running this web page knows about that font. So if I have Verdana font installed on my computer, which I do, then we can see that the font changed, and that works really well. But if maybe I misspelled something or I type a font that's not supported, then it doesn't do anything. So that might not be a good idea. Normally, when we're specifying fonts other than the standard ones, we'll specify something like this. Okay. So what this font family does is it will try and apply the first one here. So it'll try and load Verdana font, and if it works, great. If it doesn't work, then it'll try and load the sans serif font. And because this is one of the default ones, it's guaranteed to work. So the idea is that you start by specifying all your pretty fonts that you really want to use, but then you end with one of the default ones, just in case the user has no fonts installed. At least I know that my text will not have serifs everywhere if I use this. And this sort of comma-separated list of fonts, that's known as a font stack. And you can find font stacks online, so have a Google for some commonly used ones. There are font stacks that, will make your web page look like a Microsoft app when it's running in Windows, and it'll make it look like an iOS app when it's running on an iPhone, and it'll make it look like an Android app when it's running on an Android. So you can find font stacks that use all the native operating system fonts. They're pretty good for getting your web page text looking nice and tidy on any system. Okay, so other than the font family, we can also specify other attributes. For example, we want to specify bold, italic, that kind of thing. So, for example, if I want to change the text of all paragraphs to make them bold. So to change the bold status of text, it's font weight. Okay. So I give text font weight bold, then it makes it bold. Font, oops, let me type that right. Font style lets you change it to italic. Okay. Maybe I don't really want everything to be bold, so I'm going to get rid of that. But maybe I want that little span that I added before on this destroy word, maybe I want that to be bold. And we can see that this one is bold and italic because it's a span, so it gets the bold font. It's also part of that paragraph, so it gets the italic font applied to it as well. Okay. Now, there was a question before about how do you remove underlines. So this is how you add underlines. Okay, so the text decoration property lets you do underlines. Might be how you do a strike through as well. I'm just guessing here. Okay, I'll probably. Oops, I spelled it wrong. There we go. Or it just doesn't work. That's fine. That was just a guess, and I guessed wrong. That's all right. In terms of removing an underline, so maybe all my hyperlinks, maybe I don't want them to be. And what I can do is go text decoration none. That will remove the underline from my hyperlinks. Okay. And maybe I also want those hyperlinks to be a different color. I'll make my hyperlinks light green color. Now, what about this hyperlink here? Right. So we'll see that as I'm clicking on my hyperlinks now, they're not changing color. So you know how if you click a hyperlink, it changes color. That's like normal behavior. But because I just overwrote the color of my hyperlink, that's not working anymore. So what I need to do with a hyperlink, I need to specify, what it should look like when it hasn't been clicked on yet versus what it should look like when it has been clicked on. And I can do that using what's called a pseudo class. Okay, now we're going to come back to these selectors. So what I type here to figure out what I'm trying to apply the styles to. So before we get into what a pseudo class is, we'll look at a couple of other common ones. Okay. So the first one is an ID selector. So these ones here are called element selectors. They'll style all elements on the page that match. So all spans will be bold, all hyperlinks will be light green, all paragraphs will be italic, etc., etc. Let's say I want this, this banana here and this date here to be slightly different than the rest of the table for some reason. What I can do there, if I give one of these things an ID, okay, so I'm giving this table cell ID equals banana, then I can style just this one by using that same hash that I was using for the links before in my CSS. So if I write hashtag banana, that's going to style just this one here to be bold and I guess yellow because it's a banana. There we go. You can't really see that anymore, so I'll give it a little bit of a darker background. Okay, there you go. So this is called the ID selector. It will let you style one thing on a page. By convention, you shouldn't be giving multiple elements on your page the same ID. If I wanted to pick more than one thing on a page, like maybe carrots and dates, I want to style differently, okay, then I can use what's called a class. So let's maybe make a class called important. And I can give this to any number of things on the page I want. I'll give it to this heading down here as well. And then I can style anything with that class by putting a dot and then the class name. So now any styles I write in here will be applied to everything that has the importance CSS class. And one thing I might do is make the font much bigger, so we can see that has now appeared. These are twice as big as they were before, and that subheading there got a lot bigger as well. Okay. Sure, let's make it orange. There we go. So we can see those happen. All right. Now talking about talking about the last kind of CSS selector we'll look at for now is pseudo classes. Okay. So firstly, we'll look at the case where how do I change the link based on whether it's been visited or not? Okay. So pseudo classes let you define CSS selectors based on things that aren't represented in the HTML document. Like so far, all the element names, class names, tag names, IDs, all that's written somewhere in the HTML, and we can style based on that. But using pseudo classes, we can style based on other information, like whether or not a link has been visited. And so how that looks like is you put the normal CSS selector, which is for hyperlinks in this case, then a colon, and then if I write visited, then these styles will apply only to the links that have been visited. So maybe I make links I visited dark green. And so we can see this one, because that links to Google. Obviously, I've been to Google before, so we can see that it's now dark green instead. Another really useful pseudo class, probably the one I use the most, is the hover pseudo class. So it lets me style something different based on if I'm hovering over it with the mouse. So for example, if I go list item colon hover and then go background color, I don't know, light gray, and give it a little bit of a left-hand margin there. Then what that will do is now we can see, like, when I mouse over these list items, the one that I'm hovering over gets that other style applied. So you can use this to do, fancy buttons that change color when you mouse over them and things like that. Okay. All right. One more thing that I'll show you now is something that you might want to do to this image here. So we see that the image is kind of stuck here in the middle of the text, but maybe we want the image to move over to the left or right hand side and have the text flow around that. So I'll just show you what that one would look like now. So if I apply a style to these images, I can go float left. And now the image is just on the left-hand side and everything else is flowing around that. And there's also a float right, which will stick the image on the right-hand side. Usually when you're using this, you might want to give it a bit of a margin right. Just so there is some spacing in there. All right. Okay. So I've just stood up here and given you a very, very crash course into the basics of HTML and CSS. There's a lot to take in there, and of course, both HTML itself and CSS, there are a huge number of elements that I haven't covered. There are so many CSS properties. So part of web development, I think, is being able to go online and use the resources that you find there to help you. One website that I really like, for CSS especially, is MDN. Okay. So if you just Google MDN CSS and click the first link here, this link will tell you about CSS, right? It tells you some more information about it, and it contains some tutorials if you're interested in that. Or if you click on the CSS reference, if you kind of know what you're looking for, you can find many, basically, yeah, all these are all the different things that you can apply with CSS. As you can see, there are tons of them. We'll be covering some more of them for sure in the next couple of sessions, but for basic styling, can be a good place to have a look. In the lab exercises for this first session, I mention a couple of CSS properties, but don't really tell you how to use them. And your job for those would be to come to a page like this, find them, click into them, and kind of read through that page just to see what it's all about and see if you can get it to work. So yeah. All right. So also a note about the labs. So firstly, there are two exercises there. If you can finish both of them in this session, great. If you can't, don't worry about it. Go away and work on it in your own time. That's fantastic. If you want to follow the specification and produce a website that looks exactly like the example that's given, so for example, the first exercise with CSS wants you to build a page that ends up looking something like this, okay? And if you want to follow that and get a web page that looks like that, fantastic. But if you want to use your imagination and come up with your own design for this web page, then that's fantastic too. So you can use, CSS can do so much, so don't be limited by the specification that's written there. So a friend of mine, I gave her these resources when I was just checking them over, and she came up with her version of the first exercise that looks something like this. So as you can see, CSS can do amazing stuff. Just look at that, like that radial gradient there, like draws you right in. And then this scrolling marquee, it just like, it captures you, draws you into the website, like, and then you notice how like the text is moving around on the page and it's kind of difficult to read, like, really makes the reader concentrate what's going on. And then, it's kind of off the side of the page here and you can't scroll to see what the rest of the text is. Like, so it really like brings out the user's imagination in the website. Like, they have to kind of guess what the words are, so they can really take away from this website whatever they want. And then there are like some fantastic color and font choices here. So, if you wanna use your imagination and come up with something like this, instead of just following my boring little design that I made, then go for it. And I'm really keen to see what people come up with there. All right, if there are any last minute questions, I'm gonna stop talking for the rest of this session and you'll have just over an hour to play around. Myself and the tutors will be here in the room, we'll be walking around. If you have a question, just stick your hand up. Otherwise, I'll leave everyone to it.